Bioneers, it's my people. This is where I feel it's the birthplace. It really is a joining of the midwives, the ideas, the ingenuity, the creativity, the sparks of inspiration. Bioneers brings all of these visions and all of this action together.
There's nothing that's off the table here. It's all possible, and it's all connected, and it's so liberating.
I'm Imara Jones, reporting with FSTV here at the annual Bioneers Conference, that annual gathering of people from around the world and across the country to figure out how to live in better balance with themselves, with other people, and the natural world, and what the environment has to tell us about how to do all of that. One of the key goals of this conference is to bring together people from different backgrounds who may not come together but who are in common cause to help stave off the climate crisis, or I guess I should say mitigate the climate crisis and reverse it. And one of the key questions is the role of people of color in environment and environmental justice. And that's why we are thrilled today to be talking to Heather McTeer Toney, who is the field director for Moms Air Force.
Moms Clean Air Force.
Who is the field director for Moms Clean Air Force, and has so many other distinctive ways that you have contributed to this country, to everyone, not only as a mayor of the town that you grew up in, but also helping to ground and to spread the values that you learned there through your work in environmental justice as a regional EPA administrator for the Obama administration in the Southeast, all of which are very important. And so you bring so many different perspectives, from the personal to the political to the administrative to the scientific and now the activist, to this conversation. So we're thrilled to be talking to you.
So thank you for having me, and thank you for having the conversation. It's one that's so important for us to continue to have and to share and to spread. So I really appreciate this.
Of course, 100%. So one of the things that you started out today was this contrast between when you Google what an environmentalist looks like, and the reality of your work as an environmentalist, right? And an environmental protector, I should say. So, and that contrast was, when you Google, and we urge everyone to Google it, what you'll see are, white people hugging trees, lots of Donald Trump pictures, which I don't understand when you Google what is an environmentalist.
Right.
That's an interesting algorithmic choice. But it's also the case that you showed that those protecting one I believe is the largest EPA region in the country, with some of its most important waterways and all of the rest of it, everyone in that picture that you took of the people that were responsible for working on the environment in that area were all, I believe, African American, if not people of color. Yes. And so it seems to me that that gap, right, is at the very heart of the environmental movement and has been there almost for 50 years, yes. Right? And so I'm wondering, how do you believe that that gap gets closed? And how did the being raised in a family in which there was racial justice at the core of how you were brought up inform how you approach environmental justice work?
Yes, so I think you have started out on one very important notation, and that is the lens in which we see environmental justice, be it through Google or Instagram or news media or the ways that we connect with each other, is not reflective of the actual work on the ground. It's not reflective of our instant experiences. So you're absolutely right. We look on Google and there are all these images that show up of singularity, all these images that are not of community, not of people. And when we talk about environmental work and environmental justice, we realize that it's actually each other. It's us talking to each other. It's our work, it's what we do, it's what we feel, what we play with. And to bridge that divide, we have to do more of the sharing. We have to do more of sort of changing that lens and scope so that people identify with what they're doing as environmental work. I feel strongly that the things we see and use our five senses with, the things that we touch, that we smell, that we taste, those are climate issues. You can taste air pollution. You know, when you go outside your house and there's a coal plant and there is smoke that's coming out and people are describing the impacts, it's things that they are describing with their 5 physical senses. That's not reflected in the image, in the lens that we have. And as we change that, then we begin to change the scope in the conversation. We're beginning now to connect those dots. And I think one of the other moving factors is we now see a lot more of our young people who are elevating this issue. So on September 20th, when we had the youth climate strikes all across the country, and we had Greta Thunberg, who came over from Sweden, and our young people were elevating their voices, and they were sharing their pictures, and they were tweeting it, and they were dragging their moms and grandmas and grandpas out into the street. We're seeing that. But we have to make the link to that action is environmentalism. And I think as we do that more and more, we're going to begin to see a shift in what we believe not only environmentalism is, but what we believe climate action is, and tying the two together.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's always fascinating to me is that the people who fight for climate change are not the people that are most impacted by climate change. And the people who are on the front lines of climate change aren't the people who, and fighting it, aren't the people who are normally depicted. So what do I mean by that? The mainstream environmental climate change movement overwhelmingly is older, overwhelmingly is white, and overwhelmingly is male. When we know that in the United States and around the world, those people who are disproportionately impacted by climate change are people of color. You know, as you know, some of the strongest climate change and environmental advocates are Black and Indigenous and Vietnamese people who are in Louisiana and they're in Mississippi, right? Or people who are in Texas fighting the pollution that is happening in their neighborhoods. And that is where there's a ton of climate leadership, right? Tons of climate leadership. But at the same time, those aren't the people who are spotlighted nor identified. And how do we shift that? Because it's not only, I think it is important for us to think about the youth and where the arc is going, but it's also the case that right now that's also the case.
Right, absolutely. And it's a great thing that we do at Mom's Clean Air Force. We've been really adamant about making sure that we're giving the microphone to people as opposed to magnifying someone else's voice, because that's really what we're talking about. It is not that people in communities of color are not doing the work. They've been doing the work for 40 and 50 years and are really good at it, if you want to be honest about it.
That's right.
But they have not been given the microphone to elevate their own work, nor have they been given the resources to really fulfill that work in a way that is broad and shared abroad, so we can begin to share best practices. So they don't have what they need and should have been given years ago in terms of really elevating it. I think we're coming to an interesting crossroads. And that crossroads is because of the requirement for us to take significant climate action immediately. IPCC report has given us now what is 11 years that we must take some significant action to reduce carbon emissions globally.
That's right.
So we're on a time clock now. Because we have that is taking place, accompanied with what we see as actions that we're feeling as a country, be it extreme weather events, be it a varying of issues that industry we're now experiencing in terms of rollbacks from this federal administration. You have groups that have to rely on each other. So we're now at a place in sort of a crossroads where folks don't have a choice. Big industry, big green, if they want to be effective, they're going to need communities of color. That's right. Communities of color need resources. That's right. So this is now a proverbial, if I can say, come to Jesus meeting. This is a let us gather together at the table, and it's a little difficult, quite frankly. It can be a little challenging because you have our amazing EJ organizations that say, on one hand, we've been doing this work for 50 years. You know, why are you trying to steal our thunder? Don't recreate the wheel and tell us how to do this. Let us show you. Give us resources. On the other hand, you have a number of the larger organizations, or maybe organizations who have not been as engaged with EJ communities, have respected the work, but have not really embraced and invited them to the table. I think we're at a crossroads now where people are realizing we cannot do this without each other. And it's one of the things I love about Mom's Clean Air Force, because as mothers, we have this way of saying, y'all come in here now and everybody sit down at this table and have a conversation. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it with our evangelical moms. We're doing it with our Latina moms. We're doing it with Black moms in Baptist Church. We all are very concerned about the health and welfare of our children, protecting them from the dangers of air pollution and climate change, to the extent where we are mandating and saying, no, we shall have a conversation about this now, and everybody needs to sit down.
I'm going to switch the conversation a little bit to one of your other hats, and that's as a politician.
I like to say recovering politician.
Listen, you ran for office.
Yes.
How many times did you run?
Oh, wow. Let's see. 1, 2, 3 times did I run?
Okay, you're a politician.
Yes.
It's okay. So, you're a politician. Not practicing right now, but, right. But a politician. And I want to shift the conversation to hear your thoughts about how people build support for things like the Green New Deal from in a political way, right? Because one of the things that's happening on things like the Green New Deal is that there's a knock that it's unrealistic, that it's too much too fast, and that people won't support it when they really know the details and all the rest of it.
Right.
But you have, as you mentioned earlier, you have practical experience with kitchen table issues at the local level. And given that as your expertise, how do you think people go about building support for a Green New Deal?
I think it's important for us to recognize where we fit in. You know, what's our role? At Moms, we like to bring together all shades of green, is how I like to say it. It could be dark green, mint green, whatever it is. If it's green, it's environmental, then we're supportive of it. But the place we're focusing on is energy. We're focusing on making sure that we have 100% clean energy and clean energy economy in our country no later than 2025. That means that we've got to have some significant clean energy action by the federal government, as well as supporting our state and local government in benchmarks along the way. And so we recognize that that is an important aspect of the Green New Deal, and that's the aspect of it that we want to focus on. It's something that can be a rallying call for our moms. So regardless of how you may feel about it, we feel that that is a strong central point that everybody can get around. Nobody should be saying we don't want clean energy. That's like me telling, or my accepting from my kids, I don't want your room 100% clean. No, I want your room 100% clean.
Right.
Don't put the stuff underneath the bed.
Right.
Clean out the closets. Make sure the bed is cleaned off.
Right.
100% clean means clean. And that's a focus for our moms that we support. And I think it's a great way that you can build support for aspects of the Green New Deal and begin to, again, bring people together. Focusing, bringing it broad in scope, there are some folks who may have some challenges. But when we're able to really dig down into what can we have an impact on, what can we call our legislators and say, regardless of what you may feel about other things, this you can get behind, and this is what we're requiring, and then take that on a local and a state level, I think is a winning place for us.
As you travel around the country in your role as National Field Director, what do you see and feel in terms of where we are now? Are there important shifts that you've noticed over the past 2 or 3 years since you left the administration, as you're out in communities at the grassroots? What would you tell people about what's happening from your perspective as engaging mothers across the country?
I can describe it as a heightened awareness. I think mothers, grandmothers, aunties, play cousins, people have a heightened awareness about the significance of this issue in relation to the future, and the future of not only ourselves but also our children. And it's come across in their activism. You know, the people who are willing now to sign a petition to wrap climate around other issues. So when I see in the Latina community how moms are still willing to talk about climate and talk about its relation to immigration in terms of being migrants that are escaping climate crisis, that's powerful. That's something that we've just now begun to see
That's
in the
right.
last 2 or 3 years, because there's a significant role that it plays in people understanding what's happening.
That's right.
And so those voices and those stories are coming out, I think, more than ever. We were at the National Baptist Convention this year in New Orleans, Louisiana.
It's Black Baptist.
Black Baptist, National Baptist, and the Mother's Board, as I like to see. When I grow up, that's where I want to be, a member of the Mother's Board. But we were there with those wonderful women, over 3,000 women in the Women's Auxiliary, who were clamoring and really engaged to
Wow.
understand, what are we talking about with respect to climate justice? How can we talk about this from a biblical perspective? And we
interesting.
know that our young people are really active about it. We need to have something here that we can talk about, that we can teach on, that we can act on. And so,
Wow, that's powerful.
when you have the Mother's Board that is now taking action on climate, I think that's leading us into a good direction. Now, I'll also say there is fear out there. There is fear that if there is not action that we take, we will be in a place where we have irreversible impacts. So it's like seeing the children in Columbus, Ohio, that missed days from school at the beginning of the year because it was just too hot. They didn't have air conditioning. It is seeing the places in the Mississippi Delta that, due to extreme flooding, had school buses that just could not go and pick them up.
Wow.
It is those significant life impacting issues that range from extreme climate to the increased cost of food at the grocery store that hit us in the pocket.
That's right.
And those are the places that say, okay, we don't have an option right now. We have to understand this issue, because this is the social justice movement that will determine the direction of our future.
Right. It's real.
It's so real.
It's real.
It's real.
Climate change is now, right? Which is what the climate crisis is now. And one last place that I wanted to explore with you is you have a deep rootedness to the land, a personal rootedness to Mississippi, where your connections go back generations. This is the 400th year of the time when Africans. Let me start over. This is the 400th year of Africans being brought from Africa to to North America, to what would become the United States. Largely, ironically, because of knowledge that they had, which would have helped the Europeans be able to survive here, right? Because of knowledge that people had about how to grow in subtropical environments,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
How you make this work. And earlier today, you connected those two things, where you said, you can't tell us how to use the land because we actually told you, we actually taught you, and that's a historical fact. That's not theorizing. And I'm wondering what that relationship that you have with the land feels like. If you can describe, what is that feeling like, and what is that rootedness, that connection, that conversation that you have with the land? How does that inform your approach to environmental justice?
I think that is a powerful question, because it is empowering in a sense. It's one of the reasons why I still live in the state of Mississippi. It's because my parents came to Mississippi. They're from the South, but they came to Mississippi as part of the Voters' Rights Movement. My dad's retired attorney, civil rights, and my mom's retired school teacher, and my husband. Even I can recall us going to his family land, where he and his family have owned a piece of land that was passed to them after the Civil War. They were able to purchase it from the people who owned them.
Wow.
And so we went to a place where his ancestors were buried, and had an opportunity for me to sit my son down on that ground. And so just the power that comes out of that, and the peace that comes out of that, for me personally, it says that I have an authority to be able to speak, to be able to share, but also to not take no, or take the answers that I'm given, because I'm connected. And that authority, that power, is one that I think a lot of people feel. It's the power that lets us say, you can't exactly tell me when and where to plant. You know, I know this ground real well. It's our godmothers that say, you know, it's about to rain because I can feel it in my knees. And it's that connection that we have to the earth, the environment, the atmosphere around us that is our ancestors, and the power that they have given to us to say, you speak for us and you speak for this earth. Require it to rest. And we're giving you the authority to do that. And I don't take that lightly.
Right, and it's interesting because, again, this takes us back to kind of where we started, this gap between the perception of Black people in environment and connection to the living in the natural world versus what the popularized idea is. I mean, you know, as you're describing, I mean, we're rooted to the land,
Absolutely.
right? Like, we were rooted to the land before we came here. We were rooted to the land for most of our time here. We've only been separated from the land for a relatively short time from our time here, and so there's a very deep connection that we have.
It is, and it manifests itself in our work because we're so busy working it. We're not out on television or on the, you know, in the news because our focus is we have work to do
on the land.
On the land,
Yeah.
And so, you know, it is our fingers and toes actually doing the work of the land, doing the work of the people, connecting our people to what has to be done, and doing it in a manner of all deliberate speed. So, you know, it is Mother McLean, Dr. McLean out in Savannah, Georgia, who is doing and has been doing amazing work in the environmental justice movement, teaching folks how to get a job in environmental waste removal, how to do brownfields. Mother McLean doesn't have time to run all over the place and show up on every television. She will tell you, I'm busy doing the work of the people.
Right.
You know, that's the type of connection that we have that, again, it manifests itself over and over because it's that power.
And one last thing, since you have this connection, your husband's family has this connection, can you talk a little bit about the role of farmers in solving the climate crisis?
Some farmers are natural conservationists. And they can tell you more about the earth and the land probably than anybody else. But when this year I heard a Black farmer from the Mississippi Delta said that this drought and this extreme weather has concerned him in ways he's never been concerned before, that should be a clarion call to us all, because they live it, they breathe it, but they also are the people that we rely on in this country to feed and clothe us. And so it's very important that we recognize their conversations with respect to conservationism. I think they have amazing ideas of how and what farming practices are working, and that we should listen. And at the same time, we should be willing to have conversation around resources. Sometimes it's just because we're not talking the same language. So even in the South, where the stereotype is people don't want to talk about climate change, that's not true. It's just we don't call it the same thing. It's conservationists. We're concerned about hunting and fishing. We're concerned to make sure that these natural resources that we value so much are protected and are allowed to thrive. We just may call it something different.
Right. Well, and then there's also this long-running tension in the South between big agriculture and big business and individuals. And so a lot of individuals are conservationists. They care about these natural resources. But then there's, you know, long-standing practices of big agriculture, big you name it, being in direct conflict with that.
So just historically, there's so many things that can push and pull us. What we have to realize is that we don't have time for these things to continue.
Right.
And if we want any of us to continue our life and existence as we know it, even though we will have to adapt one way or another, then we're going to have some conversations with each other. And as mothers, that's what we do.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to listen and to hear your insights and what you've learned. And thank you for your continued work to help us build a better world.
Thank you for continuing to have a conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us here on FSTV. Stay tuned with more information and coverage from Bioneers.